It was the night they had planned. Laura closed Ayla's door like she always did, and Ayla locked herself in the room and escaped from the building through the familiar secret passage. It had already been a long time since they settled in this fortress, and since she had gone out secretly more than once, Ayla had already become an expert and was able to find Byron's room very easily. The window was closed due to the cold weather, but she could clearly see inside through the crack that broke when the glass was thrown. Ayla, who was looking into the room through the broken window, frowned unconsciously. Ugh, what kind of alcohol smell is so strong? The smell of wine permeated the room to such an extent that one might have assumed an entire bucket had been used. The floor was also covered in pieces of broken liquor bottles. The person responsible for the mess in the room was lying face down on the bed. He obviously would have fallen asleep if so much strong alcohol had been poured on him, but he threw a small rock into the room as a precaution. A small stone fell to the ground, but Byron was soaked in alcohol, with no signs of waking up. He seemed to be fast asleep. Ayla gently opened the window and carefully entered the room. The smell of alcohol, which could be perceived even through the half-open window, intensified as he entered. It was enough to make his eyes sting. If he stayed there too long, he felt like he would get drunk just from the smell. I have to investigate quickly and come back. Ayla shook her head disapprovingly and quickly scanned the room. However, there was no note anywhere. Do I have to return with nothing? It's a shame. Ayla was crying and looked around the room once more. Hang on a minute. This? Ayla was looking near the fireplace and noticed that among the dead ashes there were burnt pieces of paper. It looks like they crumpled and tore it before burning it. His paper was in tatters. He couldn't identify the content of his report, only the part he found, but if there were other parts, he could decipher it. Ayla looked at the bed where Byron was sleeping, then picked up the poker and began stirring the ashes. After some time like this, Ayla found 2 pieces of burnt paper. It seemed that the other parts had been burned and disappeared. The room was dark and the print was small, so it wasn't easy to read. Since it seemed like it would take a long time, Ayla decided to return to the room with the letter. Ayla's room was also dark, but it was much better because there was a small lamp. Although it took a long time, it was a safe place without the worry of being seen. If the letter was burned anyway, Byron wouldn't know if he took it with him. Finally, he picked up the stone he had thrown before entering the room and silently left the room through the window. Ayla deftly returned to her room through a secret passage, quickly changed into her pajamas, and sat on the bed. Then he looked at the note he had taken from Byron's room and shined a small lamp on it. The Duchess. You did it. Could it be a letter with news from Ophelia? Coincidentally, the most important part of what he did was hidden by soot. It was a news story about her missing mother, but she was frustrated because she couldn't say exactly what it was. She wondered if he thought this would be their last pleasant moment together, even if that wasn't the case. Nervous and uneasy, Ayla rubbed the burned area with her hand. He did so in the vague hope that the hidden letters would be revealed. However, perhaps it was simply because of the soot, so only his fingertips turned black. It looked like he was crying. No. All right? Because there is still a piece left. She hoped she could get some concrete clues from the remaining pieces. Ayla held a small piece of paper in both hands and held it up to the light as if she were praying. Then, he slowly read the words he saw, one by one. The Duke was very happy. That was the end. This time, there was no more content. Even though he knew there would be nothing, he turned the paper over and looked at the back, but found nothing else. It was a stressful moment, but Ayla's face had lost color due to nervousness and regained its color. If my father was happy, it wouldn't be bad. She didn't know what made Byron so angry, but luckily, it seemed to be a good thing for her parents. That was it. It was a sin just to think about it, but if those 2 people were happy, it was done. Ayla carefully put the burned pieces of paper in a box. That worn paper was wrinkled, torn, and even burned. Although the original contents of the document were unknown, it seemed like a priceless treasure. Lying in bed, Ayla felt cold for no reason, so she pulled the blanket up to her neck and covered herself. I didn't know if it was because winter was approaching or if it was because my heart was cold. The air was freezing. After that day, Ayla pretended to be quite calm and observed Byron's movements. This was because Byron heard the news that Ophelia had fainted and was suddenly found in the middle of the night. But this time it was different. He didn't lock himself in his room in an unstable state, nor did he come to her out of nowhere. If he completed his training quickly, he would still be able to enjoy the free time on the street that he was sometimes granted. The only thing that was different from usual was that he sometimes looked at her coldly. When he realized that and turned his gaze towards Byron, he smiled warmly as if he had never done so before, so it was very reassuring. She was lost in thought as she watched Byron gracefully put small pieces of meat into his mouth. If there's nothing special about it, wouldn't it be okay to move around at night? With winter in full swing, she was anxious because she needed to gather a little more information before the snow piled up. The more anxious she was, the busier she moved. Every night he went out to search Byron's room. He did not stop there, but began to enter and exit the entire fortress as if it were his own room, searching for information. Thanks to that, he was able to find out some useful things. Among those who shared Byron's interests were foreign nobles who were not imperial nobles. And he was able to find out the name of one of them. They had discovered details that a man named Count Senespan from the kingdom of Inselkuf, a neighboring country to the southeast of the empire, was providing money and valuables to Byron's treachery. She didn't know what the deal was between Count Senespan and Byron, but unless the count was an idiot, she wouldn't support a rebel force in another country without compensation. It was clear evidence that Byron was carrying out some type of transaction with another country. Ayla had been wasting time in a sluggish state without finding out anything. She became very encouraged when she learned this important information, and that euphoria made her pretend not to notice the fatigue that was building up due to lack of sleep. It was a day in which fatigue accumulated day by day. Why do I feel so heavy? I'll sleep tonight. As the days grew shorter and the hour of dawn delayed, Ayla searched for the fortress until dawn and woke up with drowsiness in her eyes. His physical condition was not very good, but he was not allowed to sleep too much or skip training. He stretched his body and struggled to get up from his seat. He came out to the training field with such a lethargic body and reassured Cloud that he had grown a little more today than yesterday. Although most of his original abilities were still hidden, they were such extraordinary abilities that it was difficult to even imagine them at the age of 13. After satisfying Cloud and having some free time today, he went for a walk around the fortress, like he always did. It was a scene she saw every day, nothing special, but it was a very useful moment for her whether she knew it or not. It was the only time he could completely relax and escape the tension, even if it was just for a moment. She walked for a while with the night following her at a distance, but stopped when she was startled by a rustling noise coming from the bushes. The sound was very faint, so it didn't seem to come from a large wild animal. Since it was deep in the mountains and there were few people, it was unlikely that it was a person, but she never knew. Ayla raised her index finger at the night following her, gave him a signal to kill the presence, and looked in the direction where the sound came from. It was when Ayla was hiding behind a tree and watching the bushes move. Something stuck out from the bushes. It was a small black lump, so it wasn't easy to recognize it at first, but when he looked closely, he saw long ears and a small, round tail. A rabbit? It was a black rabbit. He looked around with tender eyes and wagged his nose. For some reason, Ayla couldn't take her eyes off the rabbit and watched him. After being cautious and exploring the surroundings for a moment, the rabbit seemed to think it was safe and started running around and eating blades of grass. The image of him eating grass while clenching his protruding front teeth was somehow very cute. Ayla hesitated for a moment. She lived a miserable life to get revenge on Byron, who completely ruined her and walked on a wooden bridge that would collapse into an infinite cliff at the slightest slip. But was it okay to be distracted by a single rabbit? But it's so cute. She laughed, finally burst out laughing, and looked at the rabbit with a smile on her face, not even realizing that time was passing. The fluffy, shiny black fur and the soft, sweet eyes, it was so charming. It was something that could not be avoided. The guard following her was wondering if he should tell her that it was time to go back, but he felt bad for breaking the mood when the girl was looking at the rabbit with such emotion, so he simply continued watching. Thanks to that, when Ayla entered the fortress, the significantly shorter sun had already completely set over the western mountains.